Hey everyone, welcome to episode 5 of the Agent Economy here with Stephen and Chris. This episode, we're going to be talking to you about the shopper and how they're now a prompter. Does that resonate with you, Chris?
Yeah, super exciting. We have a few CPG brands we're working with. So this is very topical, looking at how AI is rewiring CPG decision making today and going forward. So yeah, excited to get into this one.
For sure. And we have got a piece of research that we're going to unpack a little bit in this episode. A company called Watch Me Think did a exercise looking at how people are going about using AI to search and discover products online. I recently posted the research on LinkedIn and had some commentary around it as well. Super interesting to really get into the detail of exactly how real consumers are using platforms like ChatGPT and Gemini to find and discover products. The piece of research that was done, or just say a few words about it. It looked at the US, looked at the UK, and also Australia. The age range was from 27 to 61, as you can see on the screen in front of you. And it was a range of people with differing capabilities on AI. So from very novice early users to people who would call themselves experts and more advanced users. Also looking at ChatGPT and Gemini. And Chris, we spoke about this before. I think there's other great platforms out there and we use them like Perplexity, but specifically Claude, gaining a lot of traction in various different parts of the AI markets. But when we talk about consumers in the mass looking for products online, it's primarily ChatGPT and Gemini that are the tools that are being used. And I think that's the ones that really will spend our time talking about today.
You see a lot in LinkedIn and in the various publications around the growth of Claude, but I think somewhat in the echo chamber. And obviously the algorithm is shifting based on who you're following, who you're engaging with. If you're a power of user of Claude, then you're going to see that across obviously your own ecosystems. It's still pretty finite when you look at the overall mass and usage from a B2C standpoint, that is. So yeah, ChatGPT and Gemini really are dominating the market from that B2C.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, we don't have a whole lot of data about the types of queries that people are putting into these models and the volume behind them, and also the pathways that they're following through. I think we'll probably get a whole lot more of that information as the ads ecosystem proliferates. But right now, everything's kind of reverse engineered, which I think is why this study is so interesting, because it actually looks at real use cases, real users, how they're flowing through the platforms, the questions they're asking, and how they're eventually getting to the products that they're looking to buy. And on the next slide, we've got this framing of the AI kind of owning the funnel, the front of the funnel, sorry. And I've heard people talk about this a bit like the collapse of the funnel or the collapse of the sort of consideration into AI, because everything's just happening in there. Whereas previously, I've said this in a few talks I've given, we as consumers, we'd say, here's a problem I want to solve for. That's the keyword that relates to the problem. So let me go search that keyword, see what results we get, and then go and look through those results, go to the product detail pages, go to the brand websites, read up about the products, and then that'll be the way that I do the selection. And now that just basically all happens inside of AI tools. One other quick one for you, Chris, as well, which I'd love to hear your perspective on is I had a conversation yesterday with someone super interesting, and they were saying that actually a lot from the research they'd done, which was similar to the way the Watch Me Think research was done, but from the research they'd done, they said actually a lot of queries that go into ChatGPT that relate to products are actually like one-shot queries. They're just one question, and the consumer gets the answer that they're looking for, and then obviously goes off and buys the product or adds it to the basket. But actually, what they found was when consumers asked multiple queries, they actually brought themselves even closer to the buying intent. So if you've gone in and you've made multiple queries about a certain product or a service that you're looking for, as you sort of ask more questions, you're basically shoveling yourself down the funnel to the point where with the last query you ask, you get the answer, and then that's basically the thing that you're going to go and purchase or buy online.
Yeah, it's a good point. And previously, right, that journey would have taken a long time. You would have had to go off, scan various websites, look at certain review sites, make an informed decision, and effectively then choose a product or service. I think that process now is much, much faster because of the way we're engaging with these answer engines. So the funnel has collapsed, and the speed of that collapse is significant. I see it myself with my own usage across these platforms that I can go from problem to solution much, much faster than I would have done before. The one area which I see there is a current gap is actually people like to shop and they actually like to see different experiences and understand the brand and really like to navigate around to get that kind of brand flavor, if you like. Now, whether that remains, who knows, or whether people will really just like the convenience of obviously collapsing the funnel and getting everything they need from the Google perspective or ChatGPT. I made a prediction probably 4 or 5 months ago that you'll basically be able to select the brands you want to buy from, like you're choosing a Spotify playlist within ChatGPT or Google. And then obviously you can shop directly in those two platforms as you need them. So I'm pretty bullish on that. I think you'll choose the brands directly in Google or ChatGPT, and then from there, ultimately shop directly using agentic commerce.
So that, Chris, would look like, hey, maybe I'm in market for a new TV and I'm like, it needs to be this size. I want it to be this definition, whatever attributes that I decide or constraints I decide I want to put in there. And then it'll start to maybe give me some kind of recommendations. And I'll be like, actually, do you know what? I just want to see TVs from Panasonic, Sony. That's it. That's the short list of brands. And then it'll go and just give me the recommendations from within those brands. Do you mean like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah?
so almost user preference as you're going through that funnel stage. I think that might be some type of personalization which will come into the answer engines. So we'll see how it plays out.
And then could you imagine that being like questions that, say, ChatGPT asks the user, or maybe like bubbles of brands that you click on and then say, okay, well, these are just the ones I want you to be looking at for me?
I think the former. So you already see it right in Claude. Claude obviously already knows your tech stack, understands what you're working with. It's going to start to recommend brands based on your own usage, your own use cases, your own tech stack. I think that will start to come into play, and then obviously supported with ads as well going forward. So I think there's going to be a much deeper layer of personalization, but then ultimately being able to select the brands that you typically have that brand affinity with, maybe not initially, but over time. So you
Yeah.
can kind of start to tailor the results.
I can see that. It might be like, hey, whenever you buy running shoes, you've been buying Adidas. So, like, I'm just going to recommend you Adidas shoes this time around rather than anything from anyone else. But let me know if you want to have a look at other brands as well. And then your point around how Claude works, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That dialog box that pops up and it says, is it this? Is it this? Or is it something else that you're asking me to do? And it could be the same where it says, do you want to see Adidas, Nike, or another brand? And then you can obviously type in something
Yeah,
else.
exactly.
Decided something else. So yeah, I can see that proliferating.
I think if you layer in like loyalty schemes as well directly in these platforms, then that changes the game as well, right? So if
What so if I'm a user and I'm like, hey, I have a 10% discount at Nike, whatever, so like let me have that preloaded so then it knows that it's most likely to show me Nike shoes because I've already got the member discount?
Yeah, exactly right. So as agentic commerce explodes, there's going to be a lot of data that sits and is fed into these platforms. Some of that will be loyalty data as well. So that's the model's going to understand brand affinity, previous purchases, maybe loyalty vouchers or coupons that are built up over time. That could then feed into the recommendation agent, right? If you've previously purchased. So I mean, probably getting ahead of myself, but I can see how personalization like this feeds into the platforms, feeds into the models, and then you've got a really custom shopping experience which you've never had before.
Totally. And actually that the bit about loyalty is super interesting because, for example, say you again looking for running shoes, because that's the example that everyone seems to use in AI search. Say you're looking for running shoes and you permission ChatGPT to connect to your Nike account, then it could see your order history and it could know what you'd had previously and your sizes and colorway preferences, and then it could be making you recommendations based on that. So that is a really interesting evolution. I hadn't thought about how that personalization could connect into shopping in ChatGPT.
Going to be it's going to be a key part of it, I think, going forward. I think for the first time ever, we've got a level of personalization and we've got a single point of entry and a place where you're going to be essentially, as we say, collapsing the funnel. So the data sits there, the users sit there. It's like a match made in heaven.
It is, especially for the big brands. And I think that then makes it even more like winner takes all scenario in some of those instances, right? Because you're just so sticky to maybe the brands you've already bought that already know all of your preferences and yeah, the colorways, the sizes, everything that works for you previously. But the one bit on this slide, which I think is worth just calling out is, we're talking about everything collapsing into, let's say, ChatGPT or Gemini, but there's still this transaction layer, which is I would say, unresolved, if that's a good way to describe it, because there were some attempts by ChatGPT to say they could do that. Then they pulled back from it. Now it's effectively done, by Shopify, really, across the platform and other sort of custom integrations. And to your point earlier, Chris, about wanting to go like shop and browse brands, I wonder whether that still fulfills some of that for a consumer, which is, okay, well, I did the discovery inside of ChatGPT or Gemini. I had the conversation, got to the product I think I want to buy, but now I've clicked on that and gone to the brand website, do the checkout. Just gives me that, like, how would you say, sort of pretense that I've done some browsing and decided it's the right product for me to buy, and therefore, yeah, I'm happy to buy it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And this obviously we can look at various different products and categories in this, but from an agentic workflow, if it's less considered purchase, if you're buying bananas, whatever it may be, you can automatically start to run these, right? So there's going to be different layers based on the product, different processes and different approaches. But I think for certain products, this is going to go wild. It's going to be a
Yeah.
game changer.
I agree. It doesn't look at every single category. And in the same way, we still go into stores to buy things. People are still going to want to go to, let's call it classical or linear e-com websites to buy things as well. But it could take a big bite out of the market in certain categories. And I think we're starting to see that happen already. And it kind of related to that, on the next slide, I think there's an interesting statement here. And I'd heard someone refer to AI agents as this in the past as well, about being influencers. We think of influencers as, I guess, people posting on Instagram or doing shorts on TikTok and getting people to buy stuff. But actually, AI is doing a whole lot of the influence in the purchasing decision when you're asking questions to ChatGPT and also to Gemini as well. So I think it's an interesting way to frame it, that AI is the influencer, but it kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is really interesting in the B2B space where you've maybe got users or the buyer on the buy side looking at certain tech solutions that they're looking to procure. You're going to feed a lot of context into the models, right? So you're going to tell it use cases, you're going to tell it the current tech stack you're using. And then the system is smart enough to understand that landscape and then recommend solutions based on, again, as I mentioned, use cases and current tech stack, ultimately what you're trying to achieve, what price point you're aiming for. So it's definitely an influencer. It's smarter than us. It has more data than us. It's going to be 100 times better than an RFP that you're going to run where every vendor's going to say, yes, we can do that. So it's giving you an informed decision based off your own context. It makes complete sense. Really, really prevalent in the B2B space. And the example I gave is a good example, right? You're using Claude. You need a back-end system for your structured data. It automatically recommends Superbase. It's like, I mean, if I don't know whether Superbase are a private company, but I'm buying shares if they're not.
And that like recommendation, or let's say transition we've seen in the B2B space was really like not the early warning signal, but it was like it happened there first, like the disruption. And I think we're now starting to see that filter through into what's happening with consumers as well. And then the statement from the piece of research from Watch Me Think saying brands now need to not only consider what the consumers are thinking, but also what the AI systems think of them as well, which is not new news to me and you, right? That we've been talking about this for probably almost the last couple of years, but interesting to see that coming more into the mainstream narrative now.
For sure.
One thing that I think it's interesting for us to like dig into in a little bit more detail, we talked about this already, which is the like personalization that comes through from the models and how that can help brands with that, but also this idea of let's say iterative prompts and trying to get to the answer that's specific to us as consumers. And I guess the question I've got is, we might go into a model like ChatGPT and we're like, hey, I don't know, find me a pair of running shoes. Again, we'll use that example for someone who is, and then I'd try and describe myself, right, to try and give it the level of personalization in the prompt that we need. I think the interesting thing here is we all individually think we're all very individual, don't we? Like we have very individual traits and we're all unique, and we are to a certain extent, but it's also true that we're also parts of big cohorts of people. So like, lots of people are asking the similar things and saying for someone who and describing themselves. And it's also like a whole bunch of other people too. And I think maybe the interesting thing for brands is just trying to figure out what those cohorts of people are, so that you can get your content to speak to that cohort via AI. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, 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 for sure. I think this is one of the well, this is the first start, right? If you're looking to invest in this area and really improve visibility. So thinking about it from an AI search lens, it's what are the prompts we should be tracking? How do we replicate what users are typing into Gemini, into ChatGPT? Because we're not getting the direct information back from these platforms. We don't have the prompts, the prompt volumes. We have to make an educated guess and try and get to that point. So there's various mechanisms you can do to kind of replicate what your potential customers are searching. Good place to start is always look at your existing query set. What are the queries of users coming through to your site? We do a lot in the B2B space where we actually mine actual calls with prospects to understand what are the types of questions they ask. So there's a few different areas and a few different ways to do that. And then ultimately, yeah, you're right, Stephen, you want your ICPs defined and maybe the situation they're currently in or the types of products they're searching. There's a few different mechanisms you can do here. And obviously, query fan out. The initial prompt will fan out right into multiple different prompts. So from there, you want to make sure you've got topical relevance from a content standpoint against a lot of those.
Yeah, interesting point. I think it's potentially quite technical, but good for people to know, which is, okay, people are asking these certain queries into the models. It's important that maybe your content speaks to those types of queries that are being asked in the models, but actually the queries that are being searched for or trying to be answered by the models is the query fan out, right? So it takes the original query, then makes maybe 5 to 10 other shorter, different queries that it then goes off to try and answer and brings that information back and then summarizes it so that it can then answer the original question, right? I think I've described that the right
Yeah,
way.
exactly. Yeah, it's a way to gather a much richer data set. So as you mentioned, a lot of prompts are very unique to the individual. So the query fan out process puts iterations on that prompt, and the query fan out will generate multiple prompts from there, so it can gather a richer, more contextually rich basically response in the answer engine. So don't worry about having specific answers to specific prompts because the query fan out captures a lot of other prompts and iterations of those prompts.
And then what's also true, Chris, right? If I understood correctly, is when you think about optimizing content for those prompts, really you need to look at query fan out to understand what is the content you should write for, because that's the stuff that you actually want to try and get into the answer of, because then it's going to roll up into the answer of the original prompt. And then also it could be true that within that query fan out, I might ask a query about running shoes, you might ask a query about running shoes. They're different, but they're similar. But actually in the query fan out, quite a lot of the questions are the same because the models are basically trying to deconstruct that question and put it into a bunch of other simpler questions to try and answer.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I think, yeah, important, let's say, technical point to try and unpack for the people who are listening to the pod. And then we talked about now's the time to look at this stuff. We've always got a FOMO slide, so this would be the FOMO slide for this session, which is the consideration set is shrinking. Again, nothing necessarily new here because we've talked about it for a while. But in the Watch Me Think analysis and research that was done, they talk about a winner takes most dynamic, which is true because we kind of shrank the first page of Google, which is what, maybe, I can't remember now, 10, 15 links, down to a recommendation of 2 to 5 brands, or maybe, I would call it like top three. If you're not in the top three, you're not particularly visible. The challenge is if you're not doing something now to be in that top three, then actually you might be invisible and that might get harder to fix in the future if all the other brands have been doing something about it and you haven't, right?
Yeah, definitely. Think back to the early days of Google search, right? If you were in this space, that kind of compounded over time. So it's a good time to move now to really own this area, own the category, own the topic, own the product set or service that you're delivering, and you're going to kind of reap the benefits for a long, long time. So it's yeah, good idea to move now, get included in the training sets, and obviously the RAG retrieval as they're crawling, and from there you're going to be in a good spot.
I think so. Exactly. And still early, right? I'd say.
Yeah, I feel like I've been in this for like 5 years. I mean, AI search it's a relatively new phenomenon. Obviously, ChatGPT's been around since 2022, but yeah, it's developing all the time. So it's important to kind of stay on top of it and watch the agent economy because we're on the bleeding edge.
Exactly, exactly. And talking about the bleeding edge, or maybe sort of a painful edge for some brands, is this idea of being structured with data. And this is something that I'm quite passionate about because I think a lot of this is really boring and people ignore it. But the interesting dynamic here, I think, is these models are fantastic at managing and sorting through unstructured data, right? It's true. They're just accessing lots of different data sources to try and give you the answers. But the reality is what they really want is a nicely structured data set that they can go and call and be sure of the answers that they're getting back. And so I think for brands, really, the way you should think about it is my brand signals, is the data about my brand consistent and organized everywhere in the same way? And I just know that absolutely isn't true for a bunch of brands because you can go and see stuff online where there'll be barcodes exposed on one retailer, no barcodes exposed somewhere else, a SKU code for one product with one retailer, a different SKU code on another retailer, even though it's the same product, different color attributes because maybe on one retailer they're saying it's gray and on another retailer they're saying it's I don't know, gunmetal gray or something. And so that just confuses the models massively. And so the idea of having really clean, distant, and structured data, I think, is really important for a lot of brands. And as we've got it on the slide here, if you're rolling around in unstructured data, the likelihood is you're not going to be recommended.
I don't know what your view is on this, but I was on with a very large retailer in the UK yesterday. And it was clear they're looking at this, but they've got a long way to go before their data is structured and before they're technically ready to make the leap. And so I don't know whether you're seeing it with big brands that have got, like you said, like millions of SKUs, lots of different products, lots of PDP pages. I just feel like this technology is moving so fast. And I think it's the same with AI in general. The larger organizations are just too bulky, too large, too slow to actually adopt this. So I think, again, we talk about David versus Goliath. I think if you're a small, lean retailer or CPG brand, whatever it may be, you can move much, much faster and really dominate this space. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think seeing the same thing, and I would agree with you. I think there are some companies looking at this right now, and maybe there's two follow-up points, which is so on the one hand, you've got the retailers and or the brands that have like vast amounts of data that's not well organized or consistent. And actually, AI should be able to do a good job of helping them with that, right? So, if you've got SAP or whatever other platform with loads of different information about your products and services, and you need to tidy that all up, then I'm pretty sure you can use AI to try and do that relatively quickly. There's also like a follow-on point, which is within certain product categories, there are product attributes and naming conventions which might be unique to the category, and potentially there's an expansion of those things, or certainly an organization of the attributes for a particular product category, which would be helpful for retailers to take on board and to use. And if you think about a normal retailer that sells products across the whole span of CPG, there's some attributes that fit for some categories and other attributes that fit for others. I mean, a simple example would just be apparel, right? It has various different sizes, whereas look at toys, you don't have a small, medium, large of a toy, generally speaking, right? So figuring out a way at retail where you can expose the right attributes for the category and have them complete and accurate, I think is going to be an interesting challenge to solve. And there are companies now who are trying to be the pipe, right? So, and what I mean by that is they'll say, hey, we can pipe your information into the models. So we'll take access of your catalog, or we'll access your catalog, sorry. We'll look at all of the different product attributes that you've got. We'll make sure it's all organized. We'll make sure it's fully complete. And then we'll be an endpoint for the models to come and access the data from there. The question is, will the models go and get the data from there or not? And the answer to that is, well, not if there's only one brand or one retailer's data there. Probably they're not going to be interested in doing that. But if it's done at scale by one company, then potentially they could be like the sort of what's the name of that pipeline that runs with oil through Europe? Forget the name of it. It'll come back to me. But like the main pipeline for
Yeah.
data of retail and brands to the models, there could be one of those essentially.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're not going to want to go out and extract from various kind of third parties if they can just have the client themselves. We've seen actually with ads, right? If you're setting up as an advertiser, the advertiser themselves has to set up, not the agency. So they want direct relationships with retailers, CPG brands, ecom brands. So yeah, we'll see. I think it's the power of size, right? So if they're large with coming with large tier one brands, then yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And AI overviews helpfully told me that I was thinking about Nord Stream as the main
There you go.
pipeline of gas and oil or whatever it is. It comes into Europe. So someone's going to build the Nord Stream of data for retail and
Nice.
brands and pipe it into the models, I think. But it brings us on to another important question, which is on the next slide around trust and how that trust is being transferred, maybe from the human users to AI, but also trust in the model context, which means when they're accessing data sources, they want to know they can trust the data source, right? So that's why they normally look for a few different correlating data sources before they give the answer. And so maybe the pipeline could help with that, which would be like, hey, we have this really high trust source of data that's coming through. But on the consumer side, I think it's really interesting, especially when I think about my own use of AI and also the demographic shift of AI use as well. And what I mean by that is my understanding is younger cohort, generally speaking, using AI tools like ChatGPT much more readily than the older cohort have been using them. Although there's a caveat on that, which is Rufus, which seems to be the other way around, which is really interesting. But just in general, ChatGPT, let's say, more usage with the younger cohort, but also they trust it more as well, which is interesting. So I'm not quite sure where that trust come from. Maybe it's just the older generation, yeah, learned not to be trustful of tech. I'm not sure. Maybe that was a social media thing from the last decade.
Yeah, I think as they layer in more personalization and it just becomes your own personal shopping assistant, right? And it understands what you've bought previously, understands if you have those loyalty schemes. It knows your size. It has your credit card details, has all the user reviews. It has any brand affinities that you may have or have explored or in market for. Trust is very strong. I'm just going to purchase buy now, me personally. But
Chris, the
yes.
product, even though it's twice the price of what you're thinking about buying, you should buy it.
Well, yeah, true. One would
I,
hope that ChatGPT would do the searching for me and find the cheapest price. But yeah, it's a good point.
it just reminded me actually, I told you off the pod that I was fortunate enough to go to Tokyo earlier in the year, right? And run the marathon there. And everything in Tokyo is cheap because the exchange rates are like way off with the yen not doing so well over the past few years. And I was like potentially thinking about buying a really nice watch. And I was like, maybe Tokyo's a place to buy it, right? Because it would be off price over there. And I was having this conversation with ChatGPT about it, about like what watch I could buy, and trying to get some recommendations. And I had this moment where I was like, I don't need to buy. I don't need a fancy watch. I really don't need one. So I said to ChatGPT, like, should I get this watch? And it's like, yeah, you absolutely should. Like, you do 100% deserve it. And it was like talking me into making the purchase. And in the end, I managed to resist. But it did make me think. I wonder how many people will, walk themselves into an expensive purchase because of a conversation with AI.
You deserve it. You're a hero. You should definitely go ahead and buy that 30 grand Rolex.
Yeah, exactly. It's an investment. But anyway, yeah, there we go. So, I mean, we're all trusting AI, and maybe that's a good thing for brands. Who knows? I think on the next slide, we got something that's really interesting to me, and maybe we'll just talk a little bit about Rufus here as well, which is the future is in the transaction. And so, like, I think Google were trying to do this for a long time with shopping. They wanted to be closer to transaction. Of course, Meta, similarly had plays to do shopping, and then doing quite a lot now through Instagram, of course, and then Amazon obviously being a retail platform, fully owned that transaction layer. And this is really interesting to me because this isn't just retail readiness, right? This is like the basics of having things ready for retail, which on a sort of classical website you talk about have you got the price right, product that's available, and there's like a new version of it now for agents, right? So I can see this like resurfacing again about let's call it agentic readiness or agentic retail readiness or agentic commerce readiness, which is like, have you got all of these things squared away and lined up? And it's funny because I think if you imagine you're like someone who's thinking about setting up a brand or a service, and you're going to start out with a small collection of things you're going to sell online, like you absolutely would do all these things, right? You'd have the right price in place, and you would make sure that you've got the stock to sell, because if you haven't got the stock to sell, you're not going to sell anything. And so you do all this stuff, and you'd be like, it's just basics. Like, who's not going to do that? And then you go work at a big brand, and you realize, across thousands of SKUs, across multiple innovations and renovations that come through, across all the different workflows that need to come together to get all of this content and things in the right place for it to go live. Relatively complicated to do this. So, there's going to be a whole, I think, ecosystem that builds up again around the, let's call it the agentic digital shelf space. And, that's nothing new because we've done digital shelf before for classical e-com retail, but I think there's a new variation of that that's coming in pretty strong, which is this agentic retail readiness. And I think I shared with you that company, didn't I, on WhatsApp earlier, who'd raised a boatload of money just in the last
Yeah, refi buy. Yeah, it's
yeah.
I can't remember the seed funding, 15 million, I believe.
Yeah,
But, yeah, there's going to be a lot of money pumped into this area because it's going to be big. And then from a ChatGPT standpoint, I know they obviously moved into agentic commerce, took a bit of a step back. I think part of it was the complexity of what we see on the screen, right? They hadn't fully baked out the solution and hadn't really thought about some of the difficulties with actually getting this live and obviously into platforms. So they'll still continue to develop as they go. But I saw a bit of a shift more towards Google, whether that plays out and there's going to be a battle going forward. But you've obviously got Rufus in there as well, which is from the Amazon side.
Yeah, and interestingly, on Rufus, there's been some new research or data released just as Amazon's quarterly earnings call came up for Q1, and then some other companies like Generate who'd done some analysis on Rufus, and they found that actually it was really interesting. A lot of queries on Rufus are being solved in one query, so a bit like what we were saying on ChatGPT, like people are getting straight to the answer that they want. And it's really turning out to be something which is massively supporting conversion. And so the idea would be, maybe you already kind of know what you're going to buy on Amazon when you've gone there. You don't do a whole lot of browsing on Amazon generally. And you're like, I think this is the product I'm going to buy, but maybe I've got one last constraint or attribute that I just need to check. And maybe it's in the PDP somewhere, but I can't be bothered to read it. So I'm just going to I'm just going to ask Rufus. And Rufus says, "Oh no, absolutely. This is whatever the question you've got. It gives you the answer. You're like, bang, done, and then you check out." So it's really working, I think, at the lower end of the funnel on Amazon, helping people just do that final stage of conversion.
Yeah,
Talk,
makes sense.
Talking about the final stage of conversion, I think we just got one slide left to go for this pod, talking a bit about, I guess, what you should do about it if your brand, if you want your brand to appear using the latest AEO and GEO techniques. So, Chris, I don't know if you want to close us out with your thoughts on this slide.
Yes, yeah. Before I go into the slide, obviously a bit on Google. We kind of covered it before, but they've obviously made plays in this area before. But for them, this is a significant shift. They're obviously transitioning to an AI mode or whatever they call it going forward. Historically, you would have blue links. You would then go out onto different websites. That is a loss of control. And I'm starting to hear more about actually control being the key thing here, is that oftentimes you're handing over the conversion to the customer or the partner, but maybe the web experience is poor, or like you say, maybe the user just doesn't basically complete the purchase. Maybe it's out of stock, or maybe the actual conversion path is poor. The conversion rate optimization isn't in place. So as soon as the user clicked onto the link, onto the site, Google loses control. In this world, they maintain all control. So for them, they have everything directly in platform, which ultimately, again, is going to be a huge revenue driver for them. So they don't need to worry about gaps in measurement or user experience. All of that is going to be housed within the Google ecosystem, and obviously ChatGPT as well. I was thinking about this the other day. In my head, I actually think ChatGPT was probably one of the best things that's happened for Google, because they introduced a platform where everything resides within ChatGPT. It set the precedent, which then forced the hand of Google. So in my mind now, I think they were slow to move, but actually ChatGPT being introduced has actually been a benefit to them. You can see it in the stock growth, right, as well. So yeah, super interesting area. And I think Google are going to dominate.
I don't disagree with that. And I think it's interesting because maybe there was some complacency that got sort of built in because they were so dominant in the space and didn't really have any competition. Like you said, ChatGPT came along and it seemingly was going to do a lot of disruption. So they had to move pretty quick to try and figure out how they were going to maintain, let's say, the dominance that they have in the search space.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so on this slide, kind of the strategic read for how to obviously operate in this space. I think a key thing near term is stay relevant in the AI assisted landscape. So really look at how your brand is being described by AI. And we talked about this in the previous episode, but there are various tactics and strategies you can employ to improve your presence and ultimately make sure you are a prominent entity in this space and that AI recognizes you very similarly, whether it's ChatGPT, Google, Reddit, LinkedIn, whatever it may be. So definitely audit now, understand how your brand is perceived in the market, and then make adaptations where you see those gaps or where you see misinformation about your brand. Longer term, kind of lead the retail, the AI partnership wave. So make sure you're thinking about agentic workflows and agentic commerce in particular. And we've talked a lot about kind of structured data, making sure that that kind of seamless purchase experience. If you think future state, a user funnel is collapsed directly in these platforms, how do you become a part of that conversation? And ultimately, it's a strategic decision whether you do deepen the relationship with the Googles of this world or ChatGPT or Amazon, or whether you look to kind of break away from that. But 99% of the population are going to go that way and partner deeply because the consumers will be on these platforms. It's important you kind of think about from a business standpoint, what does that deepening partnership look like? Because it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people. Obviously, working at Google previously, there was a lot of uncomfortable conversations that are often had with users kind of going all in on a single partnership. That's high risk from a business standpoint. So yeah, one to be aware of and think about strategically. And we covered this previous episode, and we're kind of banging the drum, but it is important to look at AEO, GEO, AEO, GEO, or the new SEO. I think all three are still very relevant. Like we mentioned last time, SEO really gets you into the game, into the final, and then AEO, GEO make sure you are the answer and that you are chosen by the end consumer. So lots of areas to look at, lots of acronyms. Forget the acronyms, I would say, and just focus on AI search because that is a bit of a capture-all.
Yep. I love that framing there at the end. And I guess anyone who's feeling challenged by any of this stuff can, of course, send us, either of us, a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to help them out, right?
For sure. For sure.
Cool. Well, we'll close it there for episode 5.
Awesome. Good stuff. I think we've got a few more hot topics coming, episode 6 and 7. So, yeah, if you haven't subscribed, please do. And we'll see you in the next one.
Cheers, Chris.
Cheers, guys.